Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of Mark Tech. Today we are covering an important issue that I think is concerning many people in the Apple sphere. It's a very important problem, let's say, or a gate if you want to call it that, for the iPhone 15 Pro potentially. I will have some interesting takes on it, probably in some ways more defensive, in some ways less defensive of Apple. I, in the end, am always trying to be a consumer, and in this case I literally am, because I am still waiting for my iPhone 15 Pro Max to arrive. Now I'll let myself be a little larger for now. It's Diablo. Welcome, man. Great that you could join relatively early. I know it can be an ordeal to know when exactly I am streaming. My holidays are a little erratic in that regard. So this is a topic concerning basically how well your iPhone 15 Pro might perform. How well the A17 Pro will perform. Will it overheat? What does it mean for battery life? What does it mean for basically device safety and stuff like that? We have had some reports where the iPhone 15 Pro performs not that well under sustained stress scenarios. We have had scenarios where the A17 Pro comes below performance expectations, especially given that it's based on a new node with 3 nanometer. So in my opinion, this is actually really important, because we don't want false sense of security, nor do we want to create gates out of nowhere. And I'm really happy that you guys are already joining me. Hello, Josephat, as well. And I'm really happy to cover all those things together with you. As always, please let me know if the audio and video quality is working for you all right, if the stream is relatively stable. Now, I might lose audio sometime midstream because the adapter that connects my USB-C cables to my micro USB Blue Yeti microphone is completely fucked. And I don't have an extra adapter for it. I probably will just buy a new microphone at this point, because I wanted a better one than the Blue Yeti anyway. The Blue Yeti anyway. So if that happens, please let me know as quickly as possible, so that I can switch to my MacBook Pro studio quality microphones, as Apple calls them. And as we start, cheers. I actually have seen that Coca-Cola is advertising on my channel. I know that's obviously just an algorithm thing, right? But it's still funny considering that I'm definitely an advocate for Coke here. Davey, hi Mark as well, or hi to you. You're saying hi Mark. I will not be muting myself this stream as I drink. I'll just try to lean a little away, because if I touch my microphone too much, it might go out in flames. Oh, literally ice cold. Perfection. So, I don't know who of you has been recommending that I react to the Geeker Van video. This is what I'll be doing. Starting with an iPhone 15 Pro and A17 Pro analysis first. I'll just get it out of the way. This channel has grown tremendously. We are now at over 3.5 thousand subscribers. Please do all the YouTube jazz, as I call it, to support me, like liking, sharing, subscribing. And if somebody wants to go out of their way to support me directly, this channel now supports super chats, super stickers, and stuff like that. So if you want to be a really great participant in our chat, feel free to do so. Oh my god, that was really a lot of cold Coke. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. And as always, please let me know if my audio is well balanced against the media source.
I believe you have already watched tons of reviews on this brand new iPhone 15 Pro by the moment you click on this video. So today we're going straight forward to this new chip, the A17 Pro. This isn't just any chip, it's Apple's first A-series processor with the Pro label.
Yeah, the Pro label just exists to finally get rid of the Bionic label. I wouldn't interpret too much into the Pros, as I've already outlined in like my last video where I've given predictions on how an A18 and an A18 Pro could coexist. I think that this will just be used that an A17 will be on the non-Pros maybe next year, then an A18 Pro, and then maybe an A18 the year after that in the 17 non-Pros or stuff like that. Or Apple eventually just unifies the branding, and then next year we get an A18 and an A18 Pro. And I think that would also look like really well in comparison to what is also happening on the Mac, where there the branding obviously makes even more sense to differentiate. But I would argue that the difference from Pro to Max to Ultra, like the naming scaling does not work that well. Here we would just have A17 and A17 Pro eventually. I think that works well. We are also getting rumors about a potential iPad mini. This could maybe come with like a 5-core GPU version of the A17. I think that could work really well. And I don't think it would have 8 gigs of RAM, maybe like 6. And I think that would like scale really well in terms of branding.
How it performs? We've got a full deck for you, from an in-depth look into its architecture to our signature power efficiency curve.
Now, I will warn you guys that I will have some things to critique about this video, where I actually think that they have a pretty good methodology, but they don't like put an actual scientific method onto the discovery. I'll get to what I mean. There's like very little comparisons between actual data that they have. It will make sense as we go through the video. As always, please, you can participate in the chat and stuff like that. I love seeing your guys' comments.
Real-world gaming tests and thermal and battery life tests. We also test some real AAA games ported from PC and tested the latest MetalFX upscaling feature. Can't wait to get started. Without further ado, let's dive into it. First off, let's recap some highlights from Apple's keynote. A17 Pro is the first chip made by TSMC's 3nm node. On the CPU front, they enhanced branch prediction, wider decode unit, and execution engine. This suggests the CPU's microarchitecture has undergone a considerable shift, potentially the most significant since A14 and M.
Yeah, we'll get to that as he also covers it, but anybody who tries to tell you that it's just an increase in clock frequency is flat out wrong.
Era. Along with these architectural changes, Apple has also cranked up the frequencies, the P-cores now clocking at an unprecedented 3.78 GHz, and the E-cores are at 2.11 GHz. The GPU has also seen a major overhaul, now incorporating ray tracing and mesh shading support. This means the features are starting to align with some desktop GPUs. We'll delve into its performance, efficiency, and how Apple's version of DLSS MetalFX upscaling performs on your smartphone.
A good summary thus far. I think we can all agree there's a lot of like impressive software plus hardware things going on here. Nothing so far to complain about.
Lastly, both versions of iPhone 15 Pro now boast 8 gigs of RAM. Although they didn't mention it in the keynote, but if you know iPhone well, you know this is legendary. So from now on, we're gonna talk.
Yeah, iPhones have historically had less memory than most Androids. I would say it probably peaked with the iPhone 6, where there were several Android high-end devices in that era that had 4 gigs of RAM versus the iPhone 6 having 1 gigabyte. And then with the iPhone 6S that had 2 gigabytes with its A9 chip, like there were obviously that still left most Androids with 2 to 3 times more RAM. And then we had 3 gigs of RAM on the 7 Plus. and then we finally had 4 gigabytes on the XS, and then we finally had 4 gigabytes on all iPhone models with the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro. So, and by that point, most Androids have had like 6, 8 gig options. A little later than that, many were offering 12 gigabytes and stuff like that. An interesting part here to consider is actually that Samsung's like non-ultra device, I actually don't know, does Samsung still have a base ultra, right? Do they still have, I'll just briefly go to samsung.com. Does Samsung have, wrote Samsung without the G. Mobile, smartphones, Galaxy S23 Ultra. And what are the specs? The specs are 3.36 gigahertz main processor clock. Where does it say the amount of storage? 256 gigabytes is storage, and 8 gigs of storage is 8 gigs of RAM is the base RAM configuration. So Apple actually matches Samsung's base configuration, but you get 12 gigs of memory on higher end configurations of, like, I believe with 512 gigabytes of storage, you get 12 gigs of RAM. So yeah, this is actually the first time in a while where Apple have had like very comparable amounts of memory in comparison to the most recent Samsung flagship. Now I'm actually curious if Samsung will have the guts to launch a phone that doesn't start with 12 gigs of memory, given how much more RAM efficient iOS is.
But a lot of professional crap, some really deep stuff, and I know some of you just want to see the straightforward results per se, so feel free to jump the timeline. Okay, let's take a look at the A17 Pro's CPU microarchitecture. Compared to A16, the A17 Pro has made some notable changes to its performance core. The decoder width has been expanded from 8 to 9, allowing for decoding up to 9 instructions per clock cycle, marking the first increase since A14.
Yes, I don't like the IPC advantage of this will likely not scale as much unless you get also a chip with more cache, so there's actually more room for that stuff, but yeah, this is still better just on a purely architectural basis. Dream SMP, you're asking how is my Coke? For now it's very cold and very good.
The number of ALUs has also been up from 6 to 8, which enhanced the backend instruction throughput, matching the increase in encoders.
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not an expert. I know what those things basically do, like ALUs and decoders, but for me it's basically all contributing to some kind of instruction per clock improvements. I would not be able to scientifically explain that to you, and nor will I ever claim that.
If you're interested in a detailed breakdown, including E-cores, we prepared a complete architecture diagram. Do keep in mind that is for reference, and there may be minor discrepancies. Now we know what it looks like. We have to.
They got it pretty early. The original video was it's now 7 days old. This is now 4 days old. So they got a lot of the data pretty quickly, and then they got like beta versions of AAA games out and stuff like that. It's actually pretty impressive what they're delivering. I kind of wish we had more websites like this. I kind of wish a Gamer's Nexus or Hardware Unboxed would be a little more excited about actual high-end compute capabilities and mobile devices, and when we could have really comprehensive coverage, because as great as Geekervan is in some areas, they are not perfect, and they are also don't have the largest following. I believe they have 400,000 subscribers, and then the English-speaking one is 200K, something like that.
Analyze it deeper by benchmarks. Thanks to Junjie 1475, we are now able to run all the tests of Spec 2017 on iOS. In case you don't know,
so Spec, I think you will cover that. There's no need for me.
CPU 2017 is an industry standard of CPU benchmark. And if we need to do...
For example, it's something that is widely used by an Antag. And unlike most benchmarks that you will see online, your Geekbenches, your Cinebenches, you actually need to pay for this kind of software.
Any microscopic analyzing on processor, we need to go through spec rate to properly understand the single core performance and efficiency. And also, we've introduced precise core power consumption measurements and the real-time core...
I have some little doubt. I don't know, like, I don't want to really be aggressive because it's not like I can disprove their data, but there will be some things that really make you question just the logic. Also, again, it's spec on iPhone. This is the problem with things that never get optimized. There sometimes are bottlenecks in how things perform. Sometimes you reach the maximum benchmark result basically for your specific chip by like 50% of the power consumption. But given the nature of the benchmark, the power consumption still rises. Some benchmarks are specifically created like this. For example, Josephat, you're a Diet Coke fan. This is Coke Zero. So there's no sugar here. Some benchmarks are created for specifically to test power consumption. For example, on PC, what we call power virus testing is done specifically not for benchmarking. It's actually a pretty bad benchmark. It's done to ascertain what is the relative peak power consumption of this processor. In comparison, other tasks, you usually would get a performance result, and then you would measure how much power it uses. Usually devices will give you some kind of hint, especially like most desktop and laptops, how much power they're actually using. With a desktop, you can measure, for example, power coming from the wall, because that usually corresponds with the power usage since there is no battery. On a smartphone, where this test is not modern, like, right, it's not optimized specifically for this architecture. This is the kind of stuff that will create some of those issues where you will see results that might shock you. Sometimes performance scaling will not work the way you expect. Sometimes power usage scaling will not work the way you expect. So let's get into this. I don't want to badmouth them. I think they're doing a good job overall. I just think they are very enthusiastic and really not wanting to provide that nuance as not to like lower the potential validity of the data they are providing.
That's right, we can now measure the exact CPU power draw on iPhone. In terms of thermal solution during tests, we got two standards. For the microarchitecture test and peak benchmarks, we need to control variables for better analyzing, so throttling is unacceptable. We have to control the temperature by braking mechanism in software and also using tech cooler for all devices. But for real-world tests following up, they're not going to get any assistance. No coolers.
Do I agree with this testing? The problem is they're providing help for artificial benchmarks, right? Which don't actually impact your real-world performance. I mean, you can try to scale with those artificial benchmarks in mind. I guess my point with, I would kind of love to see real-world results done both ways. I kind of would have loved to see both done both ways. probably that probably is my, like, I don't like that there is this divide between how they test real world. I know they want to say, well, in real world you are not going to see cooling, but that's not also true. You could use your device in Dubai at like 40 degrees Celsius, or you can use it in cold Canada at like 5 to minus 10 degrees Celsius. So I would still like to see some normalized results.
To help, we're gonna test iPhone thermal performance on it.
And by the way, you will see drastic differences in power consumption, probably based on that difference in testing, and that will also be part of how they try to cover the chip, without then remembering basically that they are testing those benchmarks and the real world results differently from the get-go.
And spoiler alert, it's still not so good. So here's our result on Spec CPU 2017. Let's start with integer tests. Thanks to the new architecture and boosted clock speed, the A17 Pro outperforms A16 across all benchmarks. Overall, the integer performance boost over the A16 is...
What is the data next to it? I'll just make myself a little smaller, I think.
about 10%. And the
Okay, so this is, I guess this is this is integer performance and this is floating point performance. I guess my color blindness kind of prevented me to see the difference. I assume they would need to label it somehow differently. Yeah, it all makes sense thus far. Lines up pretty well with what Apple is claiming.
floating point test told a similar story.
I have seen the video, by the way. This is a pre-watch kind of show, but it was important, so I'm not surprised in any way. And the other point is, sometimes I will just have to like remember an individual graph or something like that.
Where the improvement stands around 7%.
By the way, like crazy, like, well, this is a big increase in clocks. From A14 to A17, from 3 gigahertz to almost 3.8. Man, that's a lot. Actually, great that they have like the A15 here, because I can compare against my old phone. It's clocked more than half a gigahertz higher. That's pretty interesting.
Know that even with our specialized cooling, we do observe our A17 Pro still experience some...
This is a problem, by the way. If you cannot cool it correctly, then you probably shouldn't be cooling it either this way or at all. Like, but whatever.
...of throttling during the...
Is that necessarily throttling? Because sometimes not all tasks like scale perfectly with clocks. It's just the nature of not perfectly optimized like benchmarks. Like well, I mean, I guess you could just say, I mean, it doesn't reach its full clock speed. I don't know if it's throttling, to be honest. I cannot prove that. Yeah, so I will not be too critical. It might have throttled a little, though that makes me now doubt their methodology in terms of cooling.
Combine all these factors together, I would say the performance boost this year is only marginally approached what Apple claimed. If we set aside the clock...
Yes and no. We'll see some results leading up that are pretty much absolutely in line with what Apple has said. Again, this is a very specific benchmark where the outlier in the result is specifically floating point. So how relevant that is to an overall test, when overall benchmarks, for example, like Geekbench, still show pretty much the expected 10% increase. Like, you know, it's sometimes you try to like really pinpoint on one piece of data, but again, I will be critical here of Apple as well. So
and compare the performance.
So IPC has gone up. Now this is a very minimal increase, but there are some architectural changes here.
The same frequency, both integer and floating point segment rose by about 3%. So there is indeed an IPC improvement, but really not too much. And we stumbled upon something interesting in our test. Coincidentally, in some of our tests, A17 Pro throttled to the same frequency as A16. And guess what? The power draw stays the same at 3 watts. Ouch! Talk about a huge leap in the 3nm efficiency, huh? Well,
yeah, that to me is incredibly fascinating. I don't know if maybe the IPC change at the lower clock speed might be more significant. Maybe it's better leveraged, so maybe you could see still like a 5% increase in performance or something like that. If that's actually true, that is disappointing. I have seen some results counteracting that for the most part. Like even Dave2D showed that sustained performance is actually better on the A17 Pro, but yeah, it's hard. There might be some early, like maybe Apple will end up clocking it like 2% lower or something like that just to get rid of some issues. But if this is true and there's really no efficiency improvement at the same clock speed, then that would be a problem, because as I've said in my previous videos, some of the inefficiency I kind of like believed what came from higher clock speeds, which, as I've said before, higher clock speeds usually come with a disproportionate increase to power consumption. So in this case, like you go up by 10% in clock speeds, which could result in usually like 20% more power usage, but you then compensate for that by using a newer 10% more efficient node, for example. So that's kind of how I expected it to be. So if you were to like downclock it, I honestly think that like low power mode is probably like missing. Kind of would have been really interesting to see how low power mode performs on this phone. Regardless, there's one major criticism that I do want to say right and up front. Apple needs better cooling in their iPhones. Without a doubt, like this like between 4 and 5 watts of like passive cooling, and it's really focused on one specific area. Most Android phones, high-end Android phones, are at 6 watts of power dissipation by using heat pipes. I apologize. That dissipate the heat throughout the entire device, which makes it more comfortable to hold because there's no individual part that is the hottest. This is 100% the criticism against Apple. I don't know how well it compares against previous generations, because I know that the 14th generation was better than my iPhone, the 13 Pro. And realistically, even though I kind of can admit to issues like display dimming and stuff like that, for the most part, it really hasn't concerned me. So if this technically still performs better than my iPhone 13 Pro Max, I likely won't see much of a difference. And as I said before, as somebody who actually plans to take the new iPhone for a proper gaming spin with the new games that are coming out, I will be getting myself like an external cooler.
Based on the results of Spec 2017, the architecture upgrade of the A17 Pro certainly delivers some performance boost. With a higher IPC and increased frequency, the peak performance naturally surged. However, the peak power consumption of this A17 Pro seems a tad high. I don't know if TSMC's 3nm node generally
yes, I don't know. I think peak power usage can go up. I don't know how much that will actually happen in real world, and I actually have data for it. This data will come later in this video, by the way, where I don't know if it's actually like a watt higher in power consumption. I cannot disprove it. It would go a long way to explain some of the overheating issues, or just in general heating up issues that we're seeing in the iPhone 15 Pro. So again, I don't want to defend Apple here. Nor do I want to condemn it before we have a lot more data, but it's an important first step in coverage here.
Proved anything. I'm getting a bit nervous about that. That is how A17 Pro compares to its own peers, but now let's see how it fares against the current
Snapdragon, yep, those are completely different performance results. 60% basically, which is a more performance on the iPhone. Given the power consumption of the A16, I kind of am surprised that the A17 would not be able to reach this performance level without consuming significantly more energy. If this was consuming like 10% more energy, I would be perfectly fine with it. But if it's actually like 30% more or something like that, that also makes it technically a worse efficiency than the A16 was, which would be a little hilarious. I kind of am inclined to believe that there might be some bug going on in the system. I don't know. Because we've also seen like devices perform so differently. Like we saw like Mr. Who's the Boss video where battery life went up, which would speak for higher efficiency. But then we saw battery life on the non-Max Pro actually go down. So there probably is some inconsistency bug here. Origin unknown, so does that mean less battery life? Well, in the testing that they will be doing later on in this video, it actually does. In Mr. Who's the Boss video, it actually does not. If you will also go through this video, I really will focus more on the real world results than I currently am doing the artificial benchmarks, because those actually show really good power consumption. Around 4 to 5 watts is where I actually would want a chip like that to be for a gaming result, for example. But then they will also have like individual graphics benchmarks. Well, it will suddenly be at 11 watts and without giving any extra real performance, and there is such a real discrepancy in results that they are providing. This is why I don't like using sometimes stuff like spec, which granted I just spoke about GPUs, this spec is for CPUs. I just don't like using stuff that wasn't properly optimized for the device that it's on, because once we actually see like the actually optimized games later on, those perform really well, and they're only real bottleneck then becomes Apple's admittedly poor cooling effort inside the iPhone. And this is something that absolutely needs to change. The iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max are supposedly going to be a little longer, right, to accommodate for a larger display. I absolutely want the A18 chip to then take heat sinks and distribute the heat that is generated from the processor throughout the device. Guys, we're half an hour in. We have 8 people watching. I want to thank you guys so much. Again, if you are new here and you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Consider liking and sharing this video. And if you're somebody who wants to support me directly, this channel now supports super chats and super stickers. Let's continue.
Android frontrunner, the Snapdragon Gen 2, it supports a 3.36 GHz Cortex-X3 Prime core, representing the peak of Android power right now. When putting these two titans head to head, it's likely you're playing
Origin unknown, you think it depends on the workload. If you're playing games, then maybe that would change. Plus, Geekbench tend to push devices to... Well, the benchmarks they're using are pushing devices to their limits. That's absolutely fair. I'm not calling out Geekervan here. I'm just saying that they have... that throughout the video, they will actually see a discrepancy in results, but they make the calculations based on benchmarks and not on the actual real-world results. Kind of leads me to believe that they put a little bit too much belief in some of the benchmarks, but again, we'll go throughout the data.
In different league. The A17 Pro dances ahead with a performance gap over 40% in integer tasks and shoots even further.
Yeah, 53.6. What's 60 in my head?
Frequency difference. At the same clock speed, the A17 Pro's IPC still outperforms Gen 2 by...
Yeah, Apple has more cache. Their architecture in general is better. So yeah, it's I don't actually think there is a relevant discussion to be had if the A17 might be worse than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in terms of CPU, or if a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 has a realistic chance to catch up to it. But there definitely obviously is some stuff to be concerned about, but I will try to really hammer home that point, that disappointment that some of you might have probably has more to do with Apple, like willingness to cheap out on cooling, and also to not just, by the way, for money's sake, but also to make the device lighter and to advertise just how much lighter it is thanks to titanium. That criticism is probably like 5 times more valid than any anger that you might feel with the actual A17 Pro or with the 3nm Note. Also, again, there probably is still some software fixing to be had. In my previous video, I pointed out how, for example, the RDNA 3 graphics cards have had incredibly high idle power usage, which then got fixed. And this is still something that Apple could enact in some way, shape, or form.
Some hefty numbers. Dude, are these chips even from the same era? But I have to say, with great performance comes great power draw. With that electrifying performance and architecture, the A17 Pro's core...
Again, I would be really surprised if this is how the phone actually ever performs in the real world. Like almost 6 watts. Like, look at the difference between the A14, the A15, and the A16. Like, I mean, sure, you can see that power consumption goes up, right? It goes from 4.10 watts to 4.47, so that's a little less than a 10% increase in power usage. And then it goes to 4.57, and then on the floating point side, it goes from 5.54 to actually 5.54 to then a 10% increase to 6 watts. Now on the Snapdragon, I don't know, like, I have never seen, like, this to me just doesn't make sense from a battery life perspective, because Android devices with 5,000 milliampere hour batteries in like purely like app-based stuff have worse battery life usually than an iPhone with 4,300 milliampere hour batteries. If there was such a big discrepancy in actual like peak power usage, I don't think that even with the best software optimization we would see the real world results that we actually get. Origin, you're telling how an iPhone 14 gets like relatively quickly hot while playing Genshin Impact. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Josephite, you're still running Pro Max from yesterday's out-of-the-box battery with always on display, 30% left. Haven't charged it once yet, so that seems like you're experiencing really good battery life. Let us know, what is your experience with the device getting hot and something like that? Like, I assume you had to like download a lot of iCloud data. Maybe you're a nerd like I am, and Geekbench is one of the first apps that you install or something like that, or GFX Bench, something like that.
Power consumption is generally sky high. Factoring the entire motherboard consumption, iPhone 15 Pro with its P-core draws over 40...
Wait, what? It's motherboard power consumption. I mean, I guess motherboard is like... Wait, no, RAM is part of the SoC on the iPhone. What? What is the motherboard doing here? Like, does that account for the motherboard on the Snapdragon? Like, might Wi-Fi be not counted or something? Like, I want to believe them, but there's some weirdness in what they're saying.
30% more in integer task and over 30% in floating point than Xiaomi 13 with X3 at the peak. On the Mac, this level of power consumption might not be a big deal, but for this little piece of...
Ironically, if you put it like into low power mode, it would probably reach the performance of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, but hopefully at a lower power consumption.
Here, the iPhone, this kind of hunger for power poses a huge strain. According to Spec 2017, we plotted.
My cat is going crazy. She just took a shit. And whenever she feels like light as a feather because of it, she runs around like a crazy one. It stinks, unfortunately, but I'll try to power through it. Okay, Josephite will do some testing for us. Unfortunately, my iPhone does not look like it's arriving on September 27th, which would have been the first date where it could have arrived. At least I didn't yet get any message from the Apple Store or something like that. So let's see how it works out.
Power efficiency curve for various top-tier CPU cores out there. And here is where the A17 Pro's P-core sits on the chart. After discussing the supercharged P-core, let's take a look at the E-cores. Actually, this is the first time in history we've been able to, directly test Apple Silicon's E-core. Now, I'm always curious about this mysterious little core here in my iPhone. And today, we finally get some answers. Straight to the results from Spec 2017, the A17 Pro's E-core has made a significant leap comparing to A16's, about 20% for both integer and...
That's actually really interesting because I'm not even sure how well the E-cores are like leveraged currently in tests like Geekbench, because if you assume that like Geekbench does not show like even a full 18 or something, like maybe a full 15% increase in multi-core results, which is probably where I expect it to be if you go by 10% single core on the P cores, but then almost 20% on the E cores. And then you have to account that the E cores together, I don't know how exactly they scale between, but you would assume it's at least one extra P core, probably more than that. So it's a little confusing to me. Probably the actual power consumption for the chip has to be limited because apparently efficiency did not pan out to be as good as Apple probably hoped. And next year, guys, I know we've been pushing some expectations, but it really seems like next year is going to be the year where a lot of stuff comes together. We'll get N3E, which looks to be a more comprehensive version of N3, even if it's not technically designed to be better than N3B. And maybe finally Apple will listen when it comes to cooling, because if they usually fix backlash stuff, right? When you actually remember, the 13 Pro Max got a bit of backlash. So actually during the iPhone 14 event, they actually talked about better cooling on those devices, and that turned out to be true. And then the last point would be, if we actually get stacked batteries next year, essentially those are more space efficient and actually even better in terms of thermals, we could get a device that really performs better. Also, I don't know, is this actually ARM v9? I still have not seen any confirmation. Looks like this might still be ARM v8. So it is what it is. Seems like we're getting a little less than we expected. I would have, in terms of efficiency, we are probably getting a lot less than we expected.
Points. Diving deeper into this, if we focus on IPC, the new E-cores showcase a roughly 15% improvement in both tests, which is indeed a side.
Yeah, that's actually really, really good. This actually makes me really positive about Apple at one point using these kinds of E-cores based on 3 nanometer in an Apple Watch chip, maybe an S11. I doubt that next year we are already switching. I assume the S10 will basically be the S9.
So how about comparing this E-core to Team Android? I mean, the A510 little core here. At the same time,
yeah, that's the most little core, right? Inside.
A17 Pro's E-core presents some mind-boggling numbers against A510. 2.6 times faster in integer and 4.4 times faster in floating point. Apple actually said their E-cores are 3 times more efficient than competitors, and well, they are certainly being modest.
Well, yeah, I mean, 0.6, 0.61 watts to let's say 0.6 to 0.8, so that's like 1/3 more power consumption for 4.4 times more performance. If you actually offset that by the third, then you get to pretty much exactly 3 times better efficiency. Like, that's math. He shouldn't have said that Apple was generous. Apple is not like 0.6. This is pretty much exactly 3x. Look, this consumes a little less than, you guys cannot see my mouse pointer, I apologize. But look at the left side, right? You have 0.59 watts of power consumption on the E-cores of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And then you have 0.54 watts, so less than that, on the E-cores of the A17 Pro. And but you get like almost 3 times the performance, and you got a little less than 1x the power usage, which normalizes pretty much to around like 2.8x the efficiency. So yeah, I think Apple is actually pretty spot on with what they've promised.
Maybe we should compare the mid-core A715 from Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. We locked the A715 at a frequency close to A17 Pro's E-core, and here's where things get spooky. The A17 Pro's E-core, which is meant to be energy efficient, astonishingly edges out this A715 in performance metrics, while it slightly trails.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that like yesterday while I was like looking at some specs. It's actually fascinating how many different like core kinds there are in the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and yeah, Apple's E-core seem to be a far better like architectural compromise than having 3 extra core types to 1 performance core. It's actually kind of insane. Josephat, Gary explains on A17 breakdown, mentioning that people digging at the compilers found no evidence this was V9, so the answer is probably no. Thank you for that.
In integer calculations, it notably surpassed the A.
I guess that probably adds a little bit to the theory that we read yesterday that said that Apple probably is reusing a lot of stuff that was like designed for an A16, right? If 3 nanometer would have come out last year, and that kind of chip would have been like incredibly impressive last year, but then we got an A16 that was actually an improvement over A15 thanks to 4 nanometer, and now 4 nanometer and the first generation of 3 nanometer does not seem to be as big of a deal.
715 in floating point. In terms of power efficiency, the story is even more compelling. When the A17 Pro's E-core,
yeah, does not look like 3x, but like definitely over 2x. It's like faster, and it consumes less than half the energy. So it's like what, 2.5x efficient?
To match the performance of the A715, its platform power is way lower than the A715 platform. Of course, being a mid-core, the A715 can ramp up to a much higher frequency, and at the peak of 2.8 GHz, it certainly outstrips Apple's E-cores. But that could come with a whole different.
Is that? Okay. Yeah, multi-threading is like difficult to predict on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, how it would all scale if you actually wanted to like clock all those cores really high. I guess this is why they really give like the X3 main core so much cache in comparison to everything else, so that it can actually perform as much as possible on 1 core.
Wrapping up the spec test, the P-core showcases a robust performance boost, with the IPC seeing a modest uptick, and the overall performance.
Guys, can you tell me if you can still hear me nice? I'm always afraid of what is going on with my microphone.
Huge power consumption, and when matching against the A16, it doesn't seem to fare any better in terms of power efficiency. In contrast, the E-core's performance has taken a commendable leap, with its IPC now on par with Android's mid-cores. And all in all, the spec results are still nice, but with the shift to 3 nanometer, we surprisingly didn't see any benefits in terms of power efficiency. It's just mediocre, to be honest. Well, enough of the nerd
Thank you,
stuff.
Josephat,
Let's
for
now
confirming
enter
sound
the
is okay.
arena of processor and try some easy-to-understand benchmarks. We line up those flagship mobile chips side by side and peeking at Geekbench 5 CPU single-core scores, and the A17 Pro scores about 14% better than A6.
Okay, I don't know why he's using Geekbench 5. Like, the actual company tells you that Geekbench 6 is more realistic. Yeah, I mean, what would I have to complain about, right? It's more than what Apple promised. Do they have a way to measure power consumption during that? That would be actually really important to me. Though I guess in Geekbench you kind of cannot isolate between single core and multi-core.
And 44% better than Snapdragon 8.
Yeah, I think this is also like, this is pretty indicative of also the difference in Geekbench 6.
2. That 3.8 GHz boost isn't messing around. The multi-core performance received a slightly smaller boost, aligning well with Apple's narrative. Overall, this A17 Pro is still the fastest mobile chip on the planet. But what about the power consumption? Well, with such a skyrocketed multi-core scoring over 6,000, it draws...
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, they do have a way. Wait, how do they isolate between... Well, I guess peak power usage automatically would be multi-core usage?
Staggering 14 watts of...
Nah, nope. I don't know how they measure this, to be quite honest. I like... Where's the Snapdragon here? Is it... well, I mean, it's at 11 watts here. So it wouldn't be that different. The A14... Wait, why there are two A17 Pro results? Wait, what? Guys, am I seeing this correctly? Why do they have two A17 results? Yeah, it's good here. They have they have an A17 Pro here, and they have an A17 Pro over here with less performance, but also dramatically low power. Is that low power mode? What is that? A for Apple, SD for Snapdragon. Yeah, I know. And then you have an A17 Pro here. Wait, what? Guys, I would understand the difference between like single core and multi-core, but why are there three A17 Pros on the graph? Is that like a mislabel? They have an A16 and the second A16. They have an A15 and the second A15, and they have an A14, and I actually cannot find a second A14. Guys, is that just me? Like, look. I'll try to do that to zoom in, basically, right? You can see that here, right? We have an A17 Pro. You're saying it's testing at different power levels, but how? How would they set that up in the operating system even? Because look at that A17 results, right? It's marginally higher than the A16, right? And I do mean the A17 Pro result left of the A16 point. But it's like, it has dramatically lower power usage. And then the A17 Pro here, like, why don't they this is a weird graph. Like, is it just to me? Like, because like, how do you set different power levels? It's not like you have that much more than just low power mode and regular performance mode. Yeah, but there are 3 points on the graph. Like, there's the one on the right, the one in the middle somewhat, and then the one on the low. And I guess the one on the low... Wait, what was like the single core result? The single core result was 2167. And when we actually go to the graph, yeah, I guess that most left-turn one is single core. And then you have like two multi-core results probably. But you have such a good multi-core result here, right? You have a multi-core result that produces slightly more power than the A16 at dramatically lower power usage at like 9.5 watts versus what is this? It's like 11.2 watts, right? But then you have one extra mode for the A17 Pro, which does not have an equivalent with any other chip. And on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, you have no other modes, while most A-series chips have several modes.
Okay, I found this on the web.
Shut up. Siri wanted to say something here. On my iPad. Yeah, this is a little weird.
Met. To be fair, this 14 watt of Frankenstein is just for the peak point. If we look at the lower frequency, the power efficiency isn't bad at all compared to A6.
Okay, now I can pause it again. He's saying it's for the peak usage, but like peak usage, like, yeah, I guess, like, but why don't you have like peak usage for the other cores, and why don't you have them properly labeled on the graph? You know what I mean? Like why does the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 get one, like, I don't like, what is like, I guess the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 has like this like line that shows its performance. And then we have a line for A14. Why do we have a line for A14 in the benchmark for the A17 video? Did they have that line ready and recycle it? They might draw like a new line for the A17, right?
The same performance, the A17 Pro actually slips slightly less juice. But if you're hoping for a drastic improvement in...
Yeah. By the way, like, OBS is, guys, can you tell me if the sound of the video is alright? Because OBS now works with a delay. Because I had the audacity to move, like, the video timeline 5 seconds back, now it works on a delay whenever I play the pause button. Maybe before throttling that's peaked and sustained, it's one in the middle. Yeah, I mean, I guess, but, like, you cannot really draw those lines. Like those lines, it's not like you actually have different results, right? This is just your assumption of how it would perform at a different power level. Like, do you actually have tested? Like, did you manually set the clock speed? And if you manage the clock speed, how did you actually do that? Did you like lower all cores? Did you lower just the P cores?
Well, it is not here yet. Seems like we might have...
Like, if that is efficiency mode testing, that's one thing, but then just label that as such. Though I have never seen such a small performance difference between a regular mode and a low power mode, right? We have like over 6,000, and then we have like 5,600 or something like that. So yeah, and then that lowest result kind of looks more like a single core result rather than a low power mode. It's a little too low power for low power mode.
A bit longer. Now we know the CPUs pretty well. Let's try to figure out what this GPU really is. And the reality is...
Yeah, this is, by the way, part of my criticism here. It's like there's a lot of data given, but not actually a lot of effort put into... Like, I am a huge Gamers Nexus fan in that they usually spend too much time explaining their methodology. This does not seem to be concerned here. As I said before, can somebody tell me if the audio of the media source is okay? Because after like scrolling through the timeline, it seems to not properly listen to my pausing and playing it.
Brutal. The A17 Pro GPU hasn't even surpassed the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which has already launched almost a...
What is going on? What is happening? Why did that? Oh my god, like, why did it now jump to this? So this is power efficiency CPU, yes?
I'm pretty sure this is probably the most power-hungry chip we've ever met. To be fair, this 14 watt...
It clips a little bit, like, this is... Oh, Jesus, like... I'll do this. Like, OBS is a mess, guys, like... I'll probably be switching to like Streamlabs or something like that. You cannot move like the media source things by like a second. So I'll remove the media source as it is now, and I'll basically add it inside again. Jesus. It's like such a freaking mess. I now know why all YouTubers work with
I believe you have already watched tons of videos.
Work through YouTube directly. Like the media source thing in OBS is an absolute mess. Fit to screen, put my video above it, and make myself a little smaller.
On the brand new
Sorry guys for that.
iPhone 15 a mid-core, the A17 ever met. To be fair, this 14 watt of Frankenstein is just for the peak point. If you look at the lower frequencies, the power efficiency is
and now it doesn't work again. Like, come on. Can you guys let me know if it works again? Like, it's, oh my god, OBS is such a shit show.
all. Compared to A16 at the same performance, the A17 Pro actually slips slightly less juice, but if you're hoping for drastic improvement in efficiency, well, it is not here yet. Seems like we might have to wait a bit longer. Now we know the CPUs pretty well, let's try to figure out what this GPU really is. And the reality is pretty brutal. The A17 Pro GPU hasn't even surpassed the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which has already launched almost a year ago. That is a bit...
Why does it keep playing after? Yeah, like it doesn't let me scroll like at all. Like what kind of bullshit is? Oh my god. Oh Jesus, it's. Like, this is such, like, I hate shit like this so much. I'll play this back through YouTube. Please let me know if this now works. I apologize so much for the mess that is going on here. Like, I'll probably have to let go of OBS at some point. It clearly is not well optimized on the Mac. There clearly are some features that they just don't care to like fix in any way. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Please let me know how it works now.
On the brand new iPhone 15 Pro.
Guys, please tell me, is the audio doubling for you as well? Because this is the and does somebody know how to fix it if it does?
Click on this video. So today we're going straightforward to Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which has already know the CPUs pretty well. Let's try to figure out what...
So, can somebody let me know what the audio is right now? Is it doubling for you while I'm playing it back? We've had that already where it didn't, where it didn't have issues for you, but it had for me.
Jeep?
Like, sounds good to you. Let me just then, I don't know, like, I also think that, like, the modes in, like, here, it's like, how do I have to understand this? Is it, like, monitor only, mute output? No, that wouldn't really make sense. Wait, what happens if I do that? It doubles the sound still. It doesn't even change anything. That's so ridiculous. Okay, I'll try to listen to it thanks to subtitles, I guess.
Reality is pretty brutal. The A17 Pro's GPU hasn't even surpassed the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2.
This is just one GFX benchmark, by the way. Like, guys, I'm so sorry for technical problems here. But like, this is where I profoundly disagree with their testing. They're using like one test in one benchmark, which like, this is not how good testing, like, sorry, my technical problems just made me a little aggro, I guess, but like, you're specifically using like the one GFX benchmark result that is really known for like making Snapdragon win, even though most of them show A17 Pro being on par or actually slightly faster, while the A16 admittedly is slower. I have no problem in admitting that.
Which has already launched almost a year ago. That is a bit awkward. Well, at least they're honest about the 20% improvement over A16. But keep in mind, the A16 is already the same thing as A15 in terms of GPU, so anything under 40% is simply unacceptable for me from a leading chip designer.
Yeah, I actually hear that the sound works like perfectly fine in YouTube, so...
Like Apple. And what's truly baffling is the GPU's power efficiency. The peak power draw of the A17 Pro's GPU is grown up to 11 watts.
That is complete and utter bullshit. I have no idea how they tested this. I have never seen this. Like, and this is where their extra points on the graph really make you question what exactly they tested to achieve that result. Like, I have not the slightest clue how they came to this freaking result, because this result makes no freaking sense. At this point, that would mean basically a regression in efficiency over previous generations. This is lunacy. They're like, this is either a problem from them, or this is a severe problem with Apple, how Apple handles software. Not for a second do I believe that this chip has such bad efficiency.
And the overall GPU efficiency shows very little improvement comparing to the A15 and A16.
Like, look at even those graphs. Why do they draw it like the A14 graph, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 graph, and the graph for the Dimensity 9200? What is the point of that? Like, why don't you draw a graph just for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and the A17 Pro? Why do we have to work with points for the actual like star of the show, A17 Pro, while we get graphs for the A14? Like, what is the method here?
Don't you want its GPU efficiency even lags behind the
Yeah, I don't believe that. Sorry, I just don't believe that. No real-world result ever shows something like this. I have no idea how they measure power consumption from this. Does that did they include like the display here? Like, is it just me? Do you guys see something here that I'm not seeing? Like, look at the peak power usage of like A15 and A16. Wait, is this graph even fully up to scale? Yes, it is. Okay, that's nice.
9200 plus from MediaTek, and it is nowhere near the league of Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. Damn! A new architecture and the new 3nm process, yet you still get such a poor result? What are you doing, Apple? That is just quite disappointing, to say the least. However, there is one...
I don't know. I honestly, this is a result that I really cannot explain.
Area where this A17 Pro's GPU truly shines. It's ray tracing. In our test using the newly launched 3D Mark Solar Bay ray tracing benchmark, A17 Pro displayed a notable lead over Snapdragon. Apple seems to have invested heavily in ray tracing.
Yeah, by the way, this test is like complete garbage in my opinion. It like literally makes 0 sense by all accounts. It's like, it's the kind of like ray tracing test that probably puts on the smallest level of ray traced reflections in an image or something like that. This is not how actual like really intensive ray trace games will perform. I know this because this has this is wrong scaling for any kind of chip that adds hardware accelerated ray tracing. I know because it shows like 0 efficiency improvements or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. Like, this is flabbergasting to me because this is just a weird result.
Capabilities, although this comes at the cost of power consumption. As we can see, the real strengths of the A17 Pro's
like, guys, by all accounts, the Apple's GPUs are some of the most efficient ones on the planet. Like, and I'm not saying this to kiss Apple's ass. Like, Apple is actually heavily criticized on like the desktop front with the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro, with the Ultra chips and the Max chips, where people are saying, dude, cannot you clock your GPU higher or something? Like, it's so freaking efficient, right? Unless you consider ray tracing, then efficiency goes a little out the window, because then the NVIDIA chips start being more efficient. But that has simply to do with that the M1 and M2 don't support hardware accelerated ray tracing. But in this case, I have never seen even like by the way, the M1 and the M2 don't reach those levels of GPU power consumption.
utilizing its desktop-grade features. It is clear that Apple is trying to join the league of the AAA gaming space. Well, maybe we should put it in a test with the Apple-certified AAA title, the Genshin Impact. It's a game that every generation of iPhone seeks to master, and its demands have never been met without a challenge. Upcoming version of Genshin Impact will introduce several new features on iOS, like the MetalFX upscaling. Think of it as Apple's version of DLSS, enhancing its quality.
Here, like, guys, this is an AnandTech like test for the M1 GPU, right? And it says that what is the power usage that they've measured here? They tested also Geekbench stuff like this. I don't want to attack them just for nothing, but like, where's the power usage here? Versus Tomb Raider. Look! The actual GPU power of the M1 Mac Mini is 7.5 watts. It's either 7 watts in Rise of the Tomb Raider, or it's 10 watts in Geekbench Aztec. Like, you're telling me that Apple is now allowing the non-actively cooled, non in an iPad put iPhone to consume more power than a Mac Mini did, and that was the first gen Mac Mini with all like the that was supported like still 200 watts or something like that. You're telling me that Apple is now putting that into an iPhone. If that is true, if that power consumption is true, then that power is only the result of a bug. Like, I don't for a second believe that this is representative of how it performs. In fact, it doesn't perform that way in any other test. In fact, even in combined, like, games are not just GPU benchmarks. Games test for CPU and GPU. And in games, they will later show here that the iPhone uses 4 or 5 or 6 watts. And somehow in one test, it delivered 10 watts? Like, is ray tracing the culprit here? But then again, the non-ray traced results were not much more efficient. So this to me is absolute lunacy.
Without dragging down the performance. Or it can ease the GPU.
Like, the things they're testing look like power virus testing,
while ensuring minimal visual compromise. And with the help of my friends at MiHoYo, we managed to get our hands on the exclusive version of Genshin Impact with MetalFX upscaling. I must admit, this is the best super resolution I've ever seen on mobile device. Much like DLSS, it leverages the power of NPUs and uses AI to upscale the image. For instance, the clarity of textures here is significantly improved. Elements like the stairs.
The problem with some AI, like trying to analyze it, is that AI needs a relatively decent starter generation. He's using 740p, which probably is like pretty representative of the actual base resolution you would want to enable on the phone. But the reason why this probably won't be a good comparison to something like DLSS, even though, by the way, this is actually really good looking. Like, this goes beyond just making things artificially sharper. This actually brings in detail that isn't there on the native image, so that's pretty impressive. But the other point simply is that you usually would want to have at least 1080p as a baseline for AI-based upscaling.
Become much clearer, and the depth in the background foliage is definitely more convincing. Of course, upscaling techniques like this do have their drawbacks. In some places, you might notice some
Nah, I don't think there are any drawbacks here. Like, the base image is so trash, I will take any artifact here.
painting-ish artifact or over-sharpening. However, when you see those images on your phones, these imperfections are hard to be noticed on such a small screen. I believe this technology greatly enhanced the visual quality of mobile games, or when used in the other direction, like DLSS, it helps reduce power demands. The upcoming MetalFX Super Resolution does show promise, but it still has some way to go before its official release. For now, let's focus on the raw performance of iPhone 15 Pro series when running Genshin Impact without any tricks. The iPhone 15 Pro Max actually runs the game noticeably better than the iPhone 14 Pro Max under Wi-Fi connection. Throughout a 30 minutes test in the Thermal City, which is
I don't know if there are differences in the preset. You can actually see that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is not hitting a 60 FPS anywhere near as well as the iPhone. Like, there is some intense like fluttering here. Like, which chip is actually in the button? Is that the A14? I guess that would make sense at this point, right? But the A15 is like far above the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. So that, I think, goes a long way to show that whatever benchmark they were using prior does not seem to like really reflect that kind of real world difference, where here you actually have it hitting 60 incredibly often. In fact, I believe you still can only hit 120 on iPhones, right? I don't think Androids have 120 mode on Genshin Impact, and then the A16 is below that, and then here the A15 is actually pretty good at hitting it, but then it has like big spikes down, which I guess would come from it having like a lower ceiling than the iPhone, than the A17 Pro. And then you have like the snap, like, but does he normalize for like resolution or something like that? Because the Xiaomi 13 Pro does also not have the exact same resolution as like the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Like, there's some data missing here that I would like to see.
Most demanding part in the game, it consistently hits 60 FPS. And by the end of the test, the surface temperature of the device was 45 degrees, which is within
here's a good thing that I've talked about. Even though the Android device is pretty warm, it has distributed its heat really well. If you actually look at the iPhone, if you were to spread out that heat a little better throughout the device, it probably would be the coolest one here.
Usual range of iPhones. The smaller iPhone 15 Pro also performed better than its predecessor, particularly in the later half of the test where the frame rate were noticeably steadier. And it does have a healthier power consumption.
It's 57. So, by the way, this is where I think like real world, like, look at what? What? Guys, look at this. This is why I'm telling that their testing is downright insane. Like, they just showed the test where the GPU alone used like 11 watts versus Snapdragon's like 8 watts or something like that, right? And now in a real world result where actually CPU and GPU are used together, the A17 Pro delivers slightly more performance than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 on the Xiaomi, and about the same as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 on the Red Magic, with like 1/3 lower power consumption. And in fact, here the A17 Pro consumes less power than the A16 does. What are we even talking about? Jesus. Like, anybody who's still here, like, look at this. This makes no sense in comparison to the previous results. Like, literally zero. They're basically saying a combined... what is the power usage? They're not saying if the power usage is for the package or just the GPU. I kind of would believe that the GPU only testing for an SoC would be pretty pointless. But like, look at this. How do you actually believe? By the way, if iPhones actually had like 6 watts of dissipation, this is why I'm always saying, when you account for real world result, I have always said, when people compare the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 versus the A16, I said, yes, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is faster, especially in raw benchmarks, but it usually comes with much higher power consumption. And then some people recently have told me, well, look at Geekbench video, look at how much worse power consumption is on Apple's chip. And I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at it. They're delivering about the same performance, which I don't deny, for 1/3 lower power consumption. What exactly was your point again here?
Comparing to previous iPhone and Snapdragon phones, it only draws roughly 4 watts of power, so the overall efficiency indeed shows some minor improvement. However,
by the way, no 1% lows, which is very disappointing. I kind of expect that from a somewhat professional feeling review. Because I've seen the spikes on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. Those spikes went like really far down. You cannot tell me that 1% lows, which would be much more indicative of how a game fluid actually feels rather than average frame rate. Maybe the iPhone has allowed higher TDP if it has a cool... Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that the iPhone will have a higher attached TDP. But the problem is, if the iPhone is not optimized in any way, if this chip, if the package of the entire SoC, of the motherboard, is not even optimized to run at 10 watts, then what you sometimes will see, you will see like those spikes to 10 watts. But those spikes do not represent what the chip actually needs to reach peak performance. That peak performance that we saw as a result from those benchmarks might have been achieved 99% of it at like 7 watts, 8 watts. Right, I'm talking about like the Sunray benchmark, the benchmarks, the ray tracing stuff. But because it had a peak of 10 watts, because it was actively cooled, suddenly you have to call out the 10 watt usage. You know what I'm saying? That is meaningless testing. It's just like saying that this RTX 4090 is a 600 watts GPU, because occasionally it will have a peak of 600 watts, a peak that is absolutely unsustainable, a peak that usually does not come with more power. It's just sometimes an architecture will occasionally have a high peak. That just happens, especially for an SoC that also has like other parts on it. That can happen sometimes. So the part where they don't provide any nuance, I have said before, I am not happy with Apple limiting the power dissipation capabilities of the iPhone with its passive cooling structure to like 4 watts. I would want at least a comprehensive 5.5 watts or something like that, preferably a little over 6 watts, similar to what the Xiaomi does. In fact, the Xiaomi absolutely needs those 6 watts, because if you actually look at how hot the Xiaomi got thanks to at the same power, at the same performance, right? The iPhone reached 45.3 at its hottest point, highly concentrated here inside, while the Xiaomi was like fully soaked with heat at that point. And sure, that speaks a lot to all, because this is obviously a result from 6 watts. But look at how well, how well the iPhone relatively performs, given not in cooling but in performance, right? If the iPhone had better cooling, the iPhone would absolutely be destroying it. And this is what you need to say when you are testing the chip, because I am perfectly fine with criticizing how Apple has designed the overall phone. But if you are seeing real-world results that show the iPhone's GPU performing a third better, by the way, I don't believe that a benchmark either, because he showed average frame rate, and average frame rate is like, oh, by the way, let me get to this again,
5
right?
degrees, which
And
furthermore, as does have a healthier power consumption.
Okay, let me call that out. If you have something performing at 59.1 frames per second, by the way, 59 frames is usually what you get when a device is trying to hit 60. You usually get either 59 or 61 FPS. I for some reason, not all screens actually target 60 directly, or they calculate the average. Like when you look at the 59.1 watt, 59.1 FPS, that suggests that there's actually a lot of overhead for this chip. Because if 59.1 is your average, then yeah, sure, you might see like lows to like 40 FPS, maybe even 30, but you probably could on average get like 70 frames or something, or even 80 out of that chip. Now 57 watts suggests that it's already much closer to 60 on average, on actual average, right? Even if it wasn't like limited to 60. And on the A16 at 56.5, that's even more so. Here on the Red Magic, I would actually say that 59.9, yeah, that is like completely artificially locked. Like I would love to see what is actual the maximum power consumption here. What happens if you put the iPhone in 120 hertz mode? How much performance do you get if you let the iPhone reach like 6.56 watts? Then you could actually draw one of those graphs that they've been drawing for some reason for the A14, but not for the A17. You know what I mean? This is woefully incomplete data. This is not how you usually test out games. Like if I were like Uncle Roger, like I don't know who of you watches him, and I would be like, hiya, like not to be like a racial stereotype against Asians, but this is really how I feel. It's like a hiya, or because I could also use like my first language is Russian. I could use some really bad words to express how I feel about this. But this is actually worse than I thought, because they actually have real-world tests that show how much more efficient the iPhone is. Even here, like against the A16, right? You have 56.5, you have less performance, and then you have 4.13 versus 4.32, so you actually have lower power usage. This is a solid improvement in efficiency. Jesus Christ, this is so weird. Like if you actually probably unlock those, you would probably come out to like 80 FPS or something like that here, and then you would come out to actually like 65-ish or something like that. No, you would actually probably be still stuck at like 56 here. Then let's say by 20 more, you would probably come up to like 67, 68, something like that. Maybe even just to like 62. Right, if no, it's 20% faster, so it would be 10 frames more, a little more than 10 frames, so we would be like at 67 or something like that here. And then it would be incredible to see what the actual power consumption is, or what happens if you unlock the 60 here. Do the spikes here, is peak performance here actually good enough to increase the averages if your peak is not limited to 60 artificially? it's a little hard to say in the words because I'm a little like, guys, I will just briefly say it. I'm really stressed. Thank you, anyone who joined. Please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. And if you want to improve my move a little, please consider giving me a super chat or something like that. This has actually turned out way more stressful. Technical problems, a lot of disagreement that I didn't actually predict, and we still have to go to like the actual articles where we saw the overheating stuff.
Previous iPhone and Snapdragon phones. It only draws roughly 4 watts of power, so the overall efficiency indeed shows some minor improvement. However, there was one surprising fact. The iPhone 15 Pro surface temperature set a new record in my...
Okay, so the smaller one gets hotter. Yeah, but there's also like then you actually need to start comparing it to something like the Samsung Galaxy S23, which is comparable in size and has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. There is no point in comparing the Pro to like the Max devices or something like that.
Experience with iPhone, reaching a staggering 48 degrees in games. Furthermore, as expected, the iPhone 15 Pro
he gets like so excited, even though it's like, I mean, yeah, and did it like throttle to hell? Did it perform noticeably worse? It actually didn't in your graph.
Still dims the screen midway throughout.
Yeah, that is true. This is probably why you would want some cooling on it. I have no problem admitting that.
Gaming test. And not surprisingly, when we escalate our test to outdoor condition and 5G...
The iPhone's 5G modem is positioned basically like as a sandwich next or on top, you can almost say, to the chip. So if they both generate heat, that causes really, really bad scaling. That's unfortunately true. Androids are better in that regard. So I have no problems, guys, here criticizing Apple. It's just the way he approaches it really, really unnerves me.
Those iPhones just shrinks massively. I would say Android competitors are still better choice in those thermal demanding scenarios. Apart from Genshin Impact, another title that piqued my curiosity is the iPhone version of Resident Evil Village. Yeah, I believe you already saw the news. Resident Evil is coming to iPhone. It's hard to believe, but here we are trying the PS5 version of the game. To my surprise, the asset quality is actually close to its PC and Mac counterparts. It's not compromising too much. Just think about the hardware demand. Quite an achievement. The good news from our test is that even an A14 chip is enough to handle Resident Evil. However, the current version requires at least 6 gigs of RAM. Device with only 4...
I don't actually think it will be supported on it in the final version. I can briefly look that up.
Certainly experience game crashes, and even with 6 gigs, you may still get occasional crashes after a long time gaming. So 8 gigs of RAM would be recommended. The default setting on iPhone is rather conservative. The preset is 720p with Metal FX enabled and locked at 30 FPS. I guess they did that for the sake of thermals. However, I found the game's config file can be easily modified. So we can tweak it to 1080p mid-quality FPS unlocked, and we can make it comparable with modern PC. To my surprise, current iPhone's performance playing Resident Evil Village isn't far behind handheld.
I mean, it says that it works on only M1 and later, and M1 has more compute than an A17 Pro, so I would actually be extremely surprised if it actually ends up being supported on A14. I think that this is just a fluke of testing it through test flight. Also, look how good A17 Pro is. It performs better than Steam Deck, which uses far more power. Like, also, give us an actual power usage here, because you told us that the iPhone uses a ton of power. Why don't you give us actually some data here? Because that would actually be incredibly interesting, right? If we actually had some counterparts with like the Steam Deck, the Radeon 7 ATM, stuff like that, suddenly power consumption would actually be super interesting.
Gaming PCs like Steam Deck or ROG Ally. With adequate cooling, the A17 Pro can achieve 44 FPS.
Guys, tell me, do you think I am too aggressive here? Do you not see the same issues with the testing that I am seeing? Like, am I too uncharitable?
Roughly half the performance of a GTX 1060, superior to Steam Deck but inferior to the Radeon 780M iGPU from AMD.
Inferior to a GPU that uses 30 watts, which, given that he showed us that games used like 4 watts, seems to be something that uses 8 times more energy.
Unfortunately, this is iPhone, so we will see throttling after a very short amount of time. But even with throttling, it still maintains above 30 FPS. We're not even using MetalFX upscaling here, considering the processor's power consumption is less than 4 watts.
Less than 4 watts, wow! So it actually is it's like 4 times more energy efficient than the Radeon 780M. And in fact, when you compare that to the Steam Deck, right, you have like, this is 4 watts, this is 15 watts, and this is 30 FPS, a little more than that actually, and this is like what, 38 FPS? This is like this is double the efficiency of the Steam Deck. Probably more, depending on how much less than 4 watts.
Is quite impressive. Notably, the A17 Pro appears to throttle earlier than A16. After all, maintaining such a graphic at 44 FPS on your phone is not an easy job. Other than gaming, we still have other things to test out, like thermal performance. We use LinkPack to stress our phones and measure the heat dissipation capabilities of several iPhones and Android phones. And surprisingly, the new iPhone 15 series doesn't seem to have any improvements in its cooling.
This is actually incredibly, I don't quite get this, because they're saying the 15 Pro has better power dissipation than the 15 Pro Max, but that literally does not line up with their other results, right? Those are the same guys that showed that the 15 Pro performed slightly worse and that its heat point got a lot hotter. What is this test exactly measuring? Josephat, I agree, there's a lot of data points but very contradictory messages. I couldn't understand really what was going on half of the time. Thank you, man. Thank you, Jesus and Joseph and Maria. Really didn't get the. Oh my God, I'm getting angry about this the more I watch it. By the way, this is not even something I'm angry about. I actually probably agree with this. Now the red magic. Let me briefly look at that up. Red magic 8 plus, is it? Is it what is it called? It's 8 Pro Plus. Okay, the naming gets worse and worse on high-end devices. So is it actively cooled? Does somebody know that out of the top of your head? If it's actively cooled? It's 5,000 milliampere hour batteries, which, by the way, this doesn't bode well for its battery life. It has 5,000 milliampere hours and it runs often at higher wattage, way higher wattage than the Xiaomi one does for not that much more performance. I mean, they're saying it's a gaming phone. Okay, thankfully I'm not logged in. Does this look like it has active cooling? I guess this looks kind of like a fan, I guess, on the back. What does it say? It has a multi-dimensional cooling system. It has phase change materials. What? Yeah, well, it has a cooler. Yes, it has an active cooler. Okay, yeah, now this is a gaming phone. Okay.
Experience even handles less.
Okay, now I wish the iPhone was able to do what the Xiaomi 13 Pro does. I will absolutely be 100% open here, which I think that this is what the iPhone should be. At least it should bridge that gap by half and move up to 5 watts. I think this is where Apple absolutely falls short. I think this is where most criticisms are valid. I think this video actually turned out pretty bad, to be quite honest. The fact you guys made this in just 3 days is incredible. That probably... What? Okay, people are just climbing into his ass here.
heat comparing to its predecessor. iPhone are still way inferior to Android competitors on thermal. And I think the overall experience can be largely improved if Apple decides to, enhance the thermal performance of iPhone. Apart from that, I also concerns about the battery life. And to address
yes, his concerns about battery life do not line up with any other test in the that we are actually seeing. It lines up somewhat for the 15 Pro. It does not line up for the 15 Pro Max. So let us just go through this.
Robotic arm and repeated an 1-hour routine to test the smartphone's battery longevity.
Okay, it's on 5G networking, and it's a relatively high screen brightness. It's not okay, so maybe the 5G is like making a difference.
The results actually showed some decline.
15 Pro Max is functionally identical to the 14 Pro Max. The Redmi, the Xiaomi performs worse than the Pro Maxes. And then the 15 Pro, yeah, sorry, this is not representative of what most testing shows.
In battery life for the two iPhone models.
Maybe okay, Genshin Impact is 10 minutes. Do they normalize for like the performance level of Genshin Impact, for example?
With the A17 Pro. The iPhone 15 Pro Max lasts less than its predecessor, and iPhone 15 Pro.
But by the way, we've gone through like Mr. Who's the Boss video, and it's also like shown in other like testing. Let me just go to does GSM Arena, did they already do like their obligatory tests with the new iPhones? Oh, the iPhone ranks second in DxO mark, so that's good. There's a new Xiaomi, so the 13 Pro is not even that new. Now we have the 13T Pro. No, we do not have any benchmarks of the iPhone from them. Here's like the iPhone. Yeah, they do not have any battery tests, unfortunately. They have like a decent testing methodology for battery life. Even though they are mostly Android focused, I actually usually trust them. Yeah.
Barely lasts 6 hours. That is quite disappointing, to be honest. Battery longevity isn't just about the low frequency efficiency. Well, it does matter, but if the processor fires up the moment you open an app, if you constantly operate a phone, it will consume a considerable amount of power instantly. Sadly, our battery test cycles, including loading apps from scratch every 10 minutes, and if the device keeps utilizing this aggressive power boost, it will drain the battery quickly.
Okay, guys, I'll just have to say it because a little more than a half hour has passed again. We have 10 people watching, which is insane for me. So if somebody's watching who hasn't yet subscribed and you're actually enjoying me pulling out my hair here, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, all that YouTube jazz, as I call it. And if somebody wants to support this channel directly, please consider giving a super chat or a super sticker or supporting me directly on Patreon.
The good news is it can be addressed by restriction on scheduling. So if Apple aims to improve the battery life, I'm kind of looking forward to further upgrades. On the other hand, the battery life of
Okay, the 15 Plus wins here, which is actually does line up a little with other testing, but it's such a big difference.
15 Plus was surprisingly impressive. Despite not having a larger battery, its battery life exceeded the Pro Max by 2 hours. With the old A16 chip and a 60Hz screen, it is interesting to see its longevity. And finally, we tried to test iPhone's newer engine. It is quite challenging to test it, but we do compile the demo for Stable Diffusion on iPhone, utilizing the Core ML engine to generate image from text. To my surprise, the A16 dramatically outpaced A15, but it seems like the A7...
Wait, why to his surprise? Apple claims it's 2 times faster. Why would that surprise you?
Pro's potential wasn't fully realized.
Okay, yeah, wait, what? This is your improvement? You're also measuring again the entire motherboard power, which I don't know how much of that would be like going away at any point to stuff like Wi-Fi and stuff like that. I don't know, like, does maybe whatever device they measure with, like, does, like, do they plug something into the phone for any data during it or something like that? Yeah, this is not true, by the way. Like, very briefly, like, Geekbench ML. Ooh, browser, I think this is how you see the results. Browse compute results. Wait, there's Geekbench ML, recent results. This is the iPhone 16.2. Why can I not put that into like here, ML benchmark chart? Okay, why not this way right away? Here, the iPhone 15 Pro, this is CPU scaling, this is GPU scaling. Obviously, a faster GPU in general is faster for neural stuff as well. By the way, look at how impressive the A17 Pro's GPU is in terms of AI acceleration, right? It is like on par with the M1, which offers actually more compute power. And then in NPU performance, this is, yeah, that difference is not that big. I kind of, oh Jesus, like I don't know, like I know that it's not like I don't believe those results, but like Apple promised 2x neural engine improvements, and believe me guys, they did not have to, and I have not seen Apple lie on terms of neural engine performance promises. This is what? This is less than 10% faster. I don't think this is currently working really well. I honestly think there's like there must be some kind of software issue here. Am I just the only one that feels that way?
This might be due to the model not being quantized for low precision like int8, which is more.
Like, look at how much. Wait, what is the time? The time is blue. It goes down from 52 to 37. This shows a similar improvement. Is maybe part of the Apple Neural Engine always like occupied by some background tasks? But I don't know. I have never seen Apple lie about those claims
on those new chips. Still, for the first time, we got a glimpse of the A-series NPUs, and as AI is getting more and more important in our daily life, the importance on NPUs might just be on the rise. I do feel like this year's iPhone is quite convincing before I start the review. We got this USB Type-C port, you know.
Yeah, okay, I don't care about this. So if we go to 9to5 Mac, we actually have some data on overheating, though. Wait, what? This is from Ian Zelbo. Widespread reports are circular. Now I don't have that much more to contribute to the testing that they've done. I have voiced my criticisms. I think I thought it was worse than I expected in some ways. I was probably a little more charitable while pre-watching it yesterday. You guys can make your own conclusions. I will wait out the saga. As I've said before, I remain highly critical of Apple in how they're handling performance and how they're handling heat dissipation. By the way, this is an iPhone 15. This is not a Pro. What? Widespread reports are circulating about. Oh my god. Okay, so let's get into this. Widespread reports are circulating about the iPhone 15 overheating similarly across all models. Measurements taken with an infrared camera show temperatures as high 116 degrees Fahrenheit. Josephat, okay, I'll read out your message, man, because I'm actually really interested. It's totally out of whack according to this video. Real world testing for me so far is holding up okay. Heard from a fan the non-Pro Max battery is drying. You cannot compare battery life while the phone is so new. You have so much background tasks going on while you're first setting up your phone, and so much is still being done over the first week. You cannot properly assess battery life in the first week unless you leave the device basically empty. This is, by the way, why I usually don't like to transfer a lot of data directly, because it usually results in all those apps having to do a ton of shit. I usually like to just download iCloud and apps data, and then the next day I open up those apps and see how they are setting themselves up, and then on the third day I just use the device for normal, and then like on the fourth day I basically know that battery life will probably start to become more repeatable day by day. So it seems to affect all 4 iPhone 15 models, which is interesting because we have had an iPhone 16 and we have had an A16 chip in devices that are similar. Like, I don't. Did Apple like reduce the cooling in the non-pros as well? My iPhone 15 Pro Max is almost too hot to touch while fast charging right now. I thought people were exaggerating, but no, this isn't great. Interestingly, if I'm holding it, the left side rail in the middle of the back on the left side is what is the hottest by far. Lines up perfectly with where the logic board is. Past 70% battery percentage, it seems to have cooled down significantly. 25 to 60 was worst by far. Yes, that's how it is on my iPhone 13 Pro Max as well. Others, though, report the same issue while not charging. This would line up probably with some bug or maybe some initial background processes. It should be noted that it's not unusual for iPhones to get hot during the first 24 hours or so after setup. Okay. Korean YouTuber Bullslap did some testing with a forward-looking infrared, but that's when we first got our phones. My wife reported that the 15 Pro Max. Okay, let's look into this.
60프레임 영상을 1시간 동안 녹화해봤거든요. 플러스가 전면이 42도, 후면이
Are there translations? Subtitles, auto translate into English, please.
16도, 프로맥스는 전면이 44도, 후면도 똑같이
In the front and the same. Okay.
46도를 보여주더라고요. 발열이나 이런 게
Okay. So he did not just test the non-Pro devices.
확실히 줄어들진 않았어요. 그럼 케이스도
or anything
하나
like
볼까요?
that.
애플 정품 실리콘 케이스인데 그 파이노드
Yeah, case will not do anything for you here, man. Sorry. Is this also like a benchmark video?
나오죠. 근데 모양은 스타일이지만 다
A CPU and GPU. Okay, so he does some comprehensive testing. 420,000 subscribers. Maybe I should look into some of his videos later on.
1시간 동안 녹화해봤거든요. 플러스가 전면이
The
42도,
plus shows 42 degrees on the front and 46 degrees in the
프로맥스는
back.
전면이
And the Pro Max shows 44
후면도
on
똑같이
the front
46도를
and the same
보여주더라고요.
46 on the back.
이게
Okay.
확실히
How does it compare to previous generations?
줄어들진 않았어요. 그럼 케이스도 하나 볼까요?
Okay, I think there's something wrong with the translation. Did they do... In his test, he showed temperatures as high as 46.7 degrees Celsius. It was during demanding use. And Android authorities Amir Siddiqui said during long use sessions, often when switching between chat apps and watching reels on Instagram, the phone gets hot in the space on the right side across the bottom of the camera island. This is without gaming, without being plugged in for a charge, and this is on Wi-Fi. The heat is inexplicable to him. Looking at reports on X, yeah, like there's selection bias. So hype, hello, welcome to the stream. This is a little bit of a chaotic one. iPhone 15 Pro Max takes top video spot, second overall in DxOMark camera tests. I've told you this is an impressive phone, even though DxOMark is bullshit, but they do sometimes get it a little right. Quo says Locust Vision Pro could be cancelled. Okay, Quo had like something on Twitter that I don't know if... Okay, here. This is from Minchi Quo. I don't know if Minchi Quo has any actual data on it, or if he is... that's a cute one. Guys, I really want to encourage you to, if you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe. If you like this video and enjoy me getting angry during streams, please consider liking this and sharing. And if you want to support me directly, please consider giving me a super chat, a super sticker, stuff like that. Minchi Quo says that these problems aren't because of 3nm, but rather compromises made in the thermal system. My survey indicates that the 15 Pro Max series overheating issues are unrelated to TSMC's advanced 3nm node. The primary cause is more likely the compromises made in the thermal system design to achieve a lighter weight, such as the reduced heat dissipation area and the use of titanium frame. I don't know, like, is titanium that much worse for thermal conductivity than stainless steel? Like, I know it's worse than just iron as far as I understand, but stainless steel is more specific. Quora predicts Apple will be able to address these problems through software updates. It's expected that Apple will address it through software updates, but improvements may be limited unless Apple lowers processor performance. I said that before. If Apple does not properly address this issue, it could negatively impact shipments of the product life. It will not. It will not. This will go down as a gate. I know. This doesn't actually look worse than anything I've ever experienced on my 13 Pro Max. I think people expected it to get way better than the 14 Pro, and it has not, unfortunately. So this is what I wanted to cover. We are now 2 hours into the stream. I don't have that much more to contribute here. I got a little stressed, you could say, because of the video at hand that we broke down. I don't think it was a very good video. I think there are a lot of contradictory data points here that don't get properly addressed, similar to how like a Gamer's Nexus video would if like a GPU suddenly started using 2.5 times the energy without properly increasing performance. The Geekbench video. However, it's like some compromises in the thermal systems have resulted in like I don't know if I can even call that lesser sustained performance. Yeah, it's justified. My mic is actually failing as I have predicted. So it's getting to the time for me to like, I'll have to buy like new cables, or I'll have to I have to get a new micro USB to USB-C adapter. Can you hear me now? I've tried like putting it in Humpty Dumpty together again. It's like so fucking stressful with this thing. I should have listened to my mom. When I first told her, she was like, get something new, you moron. And yeah, I definitely should have listened to that. Just briefly. Okay. Seems like the mic is actually working. Good that I always have the stream like next to me. So thanks you, Josephat. You've been a great listener. This has been a little like stressful for me. Like OBS does not work the way I wanted it to, and I wanted this to make a fun stream. I wanted to address like just how many people joined us, but whatever. I still think that I provide a decent data here, like a decent perspective, basically. So. Not a big fan of the Geekbench video, but I am happy, not happy to acknowledge, but I am openly acknowledging some of the overheating issues that might be down to some issues with software. Let's see how Apple addresses it. We might get like iOS 17.1 today or something like that. So that will be interesting. I encourage anybody who follows me here or on Twitter to let me know how their iPhone 15 Pros are performing. And and I think we'll have a comprehensive discussion about this over the next couple of days and weeks. And I hope it all turns out for the best for us as consumers, basically. Without further ado, I want to say thank you again to everyone who joined the channel throughout it. Anyone who joined, obviously, this live stream, worked with us in the live chat. Everybody who in the last few videos gave super chats and stuff like that. None today, but it's okay. It happens. throughout it all, this has been so far an incredible journey, and as long as nothing goes wrong, I usually really enjoy doing this, and I'm really happy for all your support. I hope we can basically keep doing this for as long as possible. As always, following me on Twitter will help you also be up to date on when the next video comes out and what it's about. But always subscribe, hit the notification bell, like the videos, share the videos, all the fun YouTube jazz, as I call it. Josephat, I by the way, dude, I just said Josephat gave me a super chat, probably because I'm looking so freaking down. Thank you so much. Definitely was not forcing you to. It would be completely okay. But thank you, $2 super chat. Actually, just a super sticker with a microphone. Oh, I guess you're giving me the money for a new microphone. Is that correct then? Thank you so much. You've been a tremendous supporter, and so many others of you who have just been even contributing to the chat. Some of you have even joined Patreon. Like, it's been really great, and given that I gained most of my subscribers in like the last week, I really cannot complain about the lack of super chats. I just really hope to like encourage you guys so you even know about it, because again, my channel was only monetized this like last Saturday. So it will not, so most people don't even know that it's possible yet. This is why I try to like remind you, not because I'm greedy for your every dollar that you can give. So without further ado, I'll see you guys next time. Josephat, you'll be the last one that I read. You're saying thank you for your coverage. Well, thank you for your patronage and your support. This is Mark Tech tuning out.